Okay, so before we get started, and this is obviously lecture 2, so we have a little bit of weirdness this week because of Thanksgiving and everything like that. At this point, you should have your joints laid out for your entire character. This is predominantly for the campus students, because I have my online students listening on too. You guys are probably, the online might have pushed a little bit forward because they could have worked on their own pace on there. But mainly is at this point, you should have your joints laid out, and you should be ready to do the constraints and the controls we covered today. Does anybody have any questions about joint layout and doing the indirect system so far? Doing the big 4: position, clean values, orientation, and naming convention? I'm expecting at this point you guys are full of turkey and completely forgot everything we did the first week and everything. I've been working here 10 years, so as much as I want to wish a happy dream that it would go a certain way, it doesn't always work that way. So luckily, if you haven't got your joints laid out, you're going to be on a pinch tonight because it is due tonight at midnight. If some reason you cannot finish in time, you can get an extension. But remember, this month we're under the gun, so we want to make sure. I kept this tight deliberately because this week is not as hard as the second week and the third week. I'd rather press you this week and kind of go from there. But let me know if you're struggling onto it. Don't feel like you can't tell me. Do it. Message me on Slack. I know a couple people were messaging me on Slack over break and everything. Holy crap, he is on all the time. I am on all the time. Okay, anybody online have any questions? Nope. Okay. Okay. So that being said, we are now moving into the constraints in the connection system. So like I said, I know some of you guys are online and push farther into this. So if you do have any questions when we go along, just let me know. Oh, I didn't want to. Okay. So let me go into my lecture. Go into my preview. I'm going to download the lecture notes for today. Today's not a crazy day. I should be able to, yes, the first lecture is a little more packed with stuff. Okay, so I'm going to open up our example for today, and I'm going to okay. Okay, so to start off with, I want to talk about padding. So if I look at, if I'm going into the first example, which is pad back. Okay, so we look at our character here, and I'm going to increase my joint size. I'm going to open up my outliner. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Is it? How about that? Gotta be kidding me. It's gonna be one of those days already. I have to have a gigantic outliner according to my. Let me try it, see if I can fake it to let me resize it. Nope. Okay, fine. I'll work with it. Okay. Nice. So if I look at my joints, you see in here I have my 3 joint systems on here. Right here. I have my back, my neck, and my head. Now these obviously do not move together. So this will be the process of making these systems move together. So to start off with, I need a hip. What's the process of creating our hip? Dun, dun, dun. He's asking questions from week 1.
Just put a joint over the bottom of the spot and make it bigger.
What's that?
Make it bigger so you can actually see.
You can, but it's not there. We don't have one yet. Can I duplicate this joint? Is there anything illegal against duplicating joints? No. Why would I duplicate this joint? Because it has the exact same orientation as the rest of the systems. So I like that. I know you guys have been scared about duplicating things like lights and things like that, but we don't have that problem here. So I can't duplicate this. Do I need the children joints on these? No. So I can delete those. So I can call this my hip. Like that. Is this a bind or a waist? It's the last joint. Is it going to be connected to geometry?
No.
So you see right here, this joint here is connected to everything above. However, our hip is connected to everything below. So this little underwear area is going to be affecting the geometry. This is a bind. This is one of those rules, not every end joint is in a waist. It's only things that aren't connected to geometry. So this joint up here, way up here, that guy is an end joint. It's not meant to be. It's not part of the neck. It's the last of the back. That doesn't mean there's never going to be weighting on this. So that's why that's a waist. Where this guy here is the beginning of the neck. That has to be connected to geometry. Same thing when you go through these joint chains. This guy is not the head. That's the ending of our neck. So you might ask, why don't I just delete the joints? Because if you delete an end joint, the joint before it doesn't give any type of, you don't get a sense of orientation. Like, for instance, if I start rotating this guy around, do you see how it doesn't look like it's moving at all? When you have that other joint, it actually gives you a point of reference. So that's why I leave them on there. So if you're working on an MMO, like a World of Warcraft type of game, where joint count matters, am I going to leave those end joints in our final system? No, I'll get rid of them. But I can make a tool that goes through and deletes all those guys before I have to port it over to the engine too. So there's a lot of work we can do with those type of things. So the big one's the end of fingers. But you know, if you're doing a World of Warcraft, you might have mitts instead, type of thing. This day and age, you can get away with a lot more joint count now, but if you're doing an RTS or something like that, where you have hundreds and hundreds of characters on the screen, then you got to get more inventive with your joint layout. But with weights, they can actually bake the weights on shaders now, so that's something you could never do in the past. Okay, so like you mentioned earlier, I need to increase the size of my hip. So I'm going to increase the radius so it's a little bigger like that. Cool. I just did that because I always forget about the hip until later on, until I have to connect it to geometry, so I always like to cover it at the beginning in here. Okay, so the process we do here is we do not want to connect our end system of our back directly to our neck. We don't want to parent them together because that kind of defeats the purpose of having indirect rigging systems. So I just have the back, the neck, and the head. But we do need to connect these together. We're going to do something called constraints when we connect these together. Now what constraints do is when you parent things together, like when I go into my back, if I parent my neck to my back, you see how it changes the hierarchy like this? You see how my hierarchy changes on here? Well, I don't want to do that. Constraints allow us to mimic parenting without changing the hierarchy. It like puts a little bot that keeps them moving back and forth together. So how do constraints work? Well, there's a whole constraint menu on here. And all these different ways are mimicking different types of motions that you can get with parenting and things like that. Parent constraint mimics parenting. You'll never, ever hear me say parent when I mean parent constraining. I'll always say parent constraining because they are two entirely separate things. I'd rather refer to it just as a constraint than to say, oh, just parent those together. If I say parent, you're changing the hierarchy. If I say parent constraint, then you're putting one of these mimics. Point constraint is just doing translates. So let's say you do not want to rotate. You can do that. Orient only does rotates. Scale only does scale. Weird thing, parent only does translation and rotation. Doesn't do scale. Aim will aim at a system. So if you have like turrets, they can aim at a different object and everything. We're going to do this with eyes later on in the month. Pole vector does elbows. We're going to do that on like Thursday. And then we have all these other ones. Motion paths, closest point, point and poly. So if you want to put lapels, like you want to put like a flower in a person's shirt, or you want to put buttons. However, remember, constraints don't translate into game engines. So this is stuff you have to kind of work around if you need to mimic the same thing into a game engine. Geometry connects to geometry. Normal will face out the normal of an object. So a lot of different types of mimics on here, but we're going to focus on parent constraint right now. Okay? So before I start parenting things together with the parent constraint tool, I just said I would never say that again, and I completely just meant it that way. So here's a problem. When you apply a constraint to something, whatever you're constraining it to dominates this. Now you've dealt with this before during previous months. When you keyframe things and you grabbed a joint or grabbed a system and hit like S, this was actually locking and putting connections onto it. The only thing that can affect this joint chain are these keyframes now. So if you move this system manually and then you trigger and move the other joint a little bit, or move time just a little bit, you'll see it kind of snap back when it goes from there. So that's, you guys have all known that because you've all accidentally forgot to move time first and posed your character, and then you move time and the character snapped back and you gave off a little scream because you spent all this time posing your character and things like that. So constraints are no different. So if I constrained this system here to this system here, you would get a one-to-one connection. However, that means that this joint here would be completely dominated by the constraint. Who cares? Who would care if we do that? Well, my question to you is, does anybody ever need to animate this in the future? You're like, yeah. Well, you can't because somebody else is controlling that. So I don't want to put a constraint on something directly that's going to be manipulated later on. So I'm going to show you examples of this. The main thing is when we have a system here, we're going to actually create a series of pads to create a buffer for this stuff. So we can have something that we can connect to, but we're not losing the effect to modify something later on. Okay? So how are we going to do this? We're going to create groups. So I'm going to show you two methods. One I have the podcast for is the long way that always works, and then a faster method as we go through. So if you ever want to go over the faster method, you can always look back on this when I post it up later tonight. I'll try to get this stuff, I'll try to go back and compile this and send this up as soon as possible so you guys can reference it tonight, okay? Okay, so that being said, how do I pad? I'm going to close down my constraint. Well, I need to create an empty group. So I'm just going to, with nothing selected, I'm going to hit Command-G, like that. So I got a group down here, okay? It is connected to nothing. I'm going to make a pad for my back. I'm going to need a pad for every root system in my character. So this is a root, this is a root, this is a root, and our hip's a root. Okay, so we're going to have a pad for each one of these. So let's do our, I'm going to hide that. Hashim just came in. Hello, Hashim. Actually, I can leave that on. Okay. Oh, it's actually Hashim didn't come in. It's Emily came in. Hi, Emily. Well, Hashim did come in too. Okay, so I have my group here, and my rules on my group is I need the pivot point to be on the joint, I need it to be frozen, and then I want it to be parented to the back. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to hide my geometry. Okay, I'm going to hold down V, and I'm going to snap it right up to the target area, which is my back right here. Okay, so it's up there. It has values I don't want on it, so I'm going to freeze transforms on this. So modify, freeze transforms. They're gone. I'm going to name this. This is going to be my center, back, 0, 0 pad. So anytime I see 0, 0 on a system, I'm going to know it's the root pad on my system. Okay? And then I'm just going to parent my back right to that pad. I'm just going to middle mouse drag it right underneath it. Like that. Not underneath it, like inside it, like that. Okay? I'm going to show you this again. It's the same process for every joint in our system. Okay, so I'm going to create an empty group. Nothing selected. Create an empty group. Oh, no, that's wrong. I create an empty group. I need one for the hip too. So I'm going to hold down D and V. I'll hold down V. Snap to my hip. I'm going to freeze transforms, and I'm going to call this my center hip 0, 0 pad, like that. Okay, and then finally I'm going to parent them together. Hip to hip. Like that. Cool? Any questions so far? Anybody get to this already? A couple people? Okay, cool. I know it's also been a little bit while and everything. Awesome. Okay. Corrine, are you cool with that so far? Because I know you had some issues with that. Creating the pads. Good. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to show you a fast method, which is going to irritate a couple of people that are online right now because I didn't cover it. If you looked at last month's one, you'll see this. Okay, so a fast way of doing that. Now, this will look a little weird when I do it. It's going to look like magic, but it's a more efficient way of doing it. But you got to know the long way of doing in case one of these methods break. So typically what I was doing on here before as I was unselecting and creating the group, well, if I select my joint and I hit Command-G to group it, do you see how it grouped my joint system together? But we have a problem here because my pivot point is all the way down here. Well, if I hold down V, you're going to notice that it's going to start moving the whole system like up, and I don't want that. However, if you hold down D, D actually will allow you to move the pivot point around. Look what's happening. You see how I'm getting no values on here? And it's moving the pivot point. Well, if I hold down D and V, I could move my pivot point up to where it needs to be, like that. And it's all of a sudden, it's there. I just changed the name to center. This is my neck. neck, 0, 0 pad, and it's done. I don't have to freeze transforms because it doesn't get any transforms onto it. And I don't have to worry about parenting it already because it already is parented onto it. And I don't even have to move these guys back into the hierarchy, into my joints hierarchy. It's already there. So let me show you at the head. I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to hit Command-G with it selected. I'm going to hold down D and V, middle mouse drag it up into position. And I'm just going to name my system center, head, 0, 0, pad. That's done. The only problem I have with that method is that when I show it to you the first time, it looks really confusing, and you don't necessarily understand what I'm really doing in that process. I'm creating a separate group, and I'm just making sure that it's on the same pivot point on there. So seeing the long way, you get to see how all the pieces go down. So if something happened and you couldn't do this method, you could still do them separately and put them back together. So that's why I show the other method onto it. Okay? Cool. So at the end of the day, I get to make sure that my pads are back under my joint system, so it looks like this. Cool? Every system needs this. All your fingers need this. Each separate finger, your hand, your arm, your clavicle, your legs, and obviously your hip and things like that. Okay? You guys good? Yes?
So you don't put the pad group center on the waist, you put it on the bone?
It'll be on the first joint, whatever that is. The reason why I say that is there's a very rare occurrence where your first joint will be a waist. Very, very rare. You want eventually the beginning of your joint system is going to be moved by something else. So you need a pad before that because you need that as your buffer. Think of it as your tendons that you're connecting. You don't put bone on bone. You have cartilage and tendons between it. This is what we're building there. Think of little white blocks as cartilage. Okay? Cool. You guys good online? I can hear people like, oh my God, I wish I knew that earlier. Cool. Okay, so let me move into the next scene. And I'm going to go into connecting. Now we're going to go back to the constraints. I'm going to go into connected back, and I'm going to do a couple of these systems because I had some requests to show me to go over a couple of areas on here. But we're going to focus on our back first. Okay. So we got our back here, and you see I have my pads. I don't have my hip, but I don't care about that here. So now I'm going to deal with constraints. So I'm going to go up to my constraints and go into my parent constraint. We want to make sure our maintain offset is turned on. I'm going to talk about this a lot more the next class on Thursday. It feels so weird. I feel like I want to say it's going to be Tuesday because this is normally the second lecture of the week and on it. Okay, so how constraints work, it's a driver-driven system. And what I mean by that is you have a driver, what is pushing, and what is being pushed. So I always say driver and driven because that settles in my brain whether. I don't like the word constrained and constrained. It gets confused in my head and everything. So when I say this is driver driven, with my back, our driver is the end of our back, this waist joint here. The driven is not the joint here. The driven is the pad above it. So if I go in and I expand my neck, this is my driver and my driven is the pad. Can you select a pad in the perspective view? No. So in other words, if you do this, you're doing something wrong. If I see in this part, if I see a constraint in this area on your joint, you did something wrong. So we do our driver, which is our last joint in our back, and our driven is our pad, like that. And then we're going to hit apply. And it looks like nothing's happened, but you see now I have my constraints on here. I see my little blue bars. So I click away and I clicked on my back. You see purple? Purple means it's being influenced. Green means it's directly influenced, like this. They're directly parented to each other. Purple means it's being influenced, but by a different system, like a bot or a bind or something like that. So if I grab my joints on here and I move this back and forth, you see how it moves? Like this. Now let me show you the wrong way of doing it. If I go in and I select my end joint and I select my back, my head, remember I'm bypassing my pad at this case. So I hit apply. Here's the dangerous thing. You see how it all turns purple and it looks like it's fine? However, when I grab my joint, do you see the blue bars here? This means nothing can be put on this. So if you try to put a control on this, it is not going to work because the constraint is going to say, this is mine. It's like moving into someone else's territory. This constraint is going to scream bloody murder at you. So how do you get rid of constraints? Well, if you look on this actual joint, you see I see this little like chain link right here. This is that little bot that's keeping them together. So if I want to get rid of it, I just select that constraint and hit delete, and it's gone. And you'll notice no more blue bars. In my 16, it used to color the entire field. Now it just puts this little tiny little chiclet of color on there, which is, I don't really care for that. Okay, so again, I'm going to select my driver, which is my neck end, and my driven, which is my pad. And I'm going to hit apply. So if you'll notice now, here is one other thing that I want to point out here. What does the dot, dot, dot in the channel box mean? Right. When you apply your constraint, the driver and driven are still selected. But there's a connection between the two of these. So if you don't unselect, it's going to do something really crazy if you try to move it now. It's going to do this. It's not broken. I just unselect, and now I can select my neck, and you see how it moves back and forth. See? Now, I know in the podcast, I'm going to get some dirty looks on this too. I know in the podcast that the geometry moves with this because it's a proxy system setup. At this point in your rig, you do not have that set up on there. So your geometry will not move with your joints. Just like mine, it's not moving with my joints right now. Could you actually go in and put a test bind on this before you do this part? Yes, you could. You could absolutely do that. But I just wanted to warn you. I always get one person screaming like, it's not working. It's like, no, it's working fine. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing. I know. It's like, I'm going to apologize. One of these days I'll put a little like disclaimer on the podcast. Like, this is not going to move with your character. Okay. Cool. So you see everything's moving. I'm going to show you a couple of other examples on here because if you started this, you probably already did this part. And you're like, this is review. I've seen this already. Okay, so I'm going to move into my next example. I want to do the legs because this is one that sometimes people make mistakes on. Okay, joint's way too big. Yeah. Do the large joint size matter? No, it's just a visual thing. Okay, so we look at our outliner. Can I change my size of my outliner now? Of course not. Okay. Cool. So what are these systems going to be connected to? We've got our legs here. The hip. When I move my hip, the legs need to move. So it's a very common mistake. I've seen a couple people in the prior months will actually connect these guys to the pad above the hip, and that's not correct. It's supposed to be our driver is our hip. Our driven is going to be our pad, like this, and apply. Hey, can I select both of these at the same time? No, you can't. It's driver driven. It's actually not correct. It's actually drivers, and driven is the proper term on that. So you can have multiple things drive one thing. Meaning if I had targets and I wanted a bullet to pass through those targets, I can do that with constraints. So in other words, what you're doing is you're connecting two drivers to that joint. You're not doing what you think you're doing. Could I build a tool, a custom tool that does that? Yes, I can absolutely do that. You can modify and change that stuff. So we go, our drivers are joint, and our drivens are pad. And I hit apply. So I'm going to make that mistake. Lecture is not just about doing everything perfect. I want to make that mistake. So I want to say driver. I want to grab my hip, and I'm going to grab my other leg. I'm going to hit apply. And I want to show you what happens when I do this. So I move my joint. And you see how it's not quite working right? Like, hey, why is it only moving one leg? But then when I grab the other leg, oh, actually, I guess I didn't grab everything right. So let's do this right. Driver, driven, apply. Again, if you're watching along on this, do not do this. I'm deliberately making a mistake on this. Why the hell's not doing that? That's weird. Huh. It didn't apply it to the other one. Did they change the order? I don't know why they would do that. Okay, I'm going to try to really break this now. Because I want to show you how you fix this if this happens. Because you don't, I want you to be able to identify this. Okay, really didn't like that. Did that still have a constraint on it? No. It's amazing. I'm trying to break it, and it's like, no, you don't want to do that. You really don't want to do that. Like, I do want to do that. Break it. Do it. So, okay, it did do it this time, but I still don't see it. Okay, so that's moving. That's not moving. It's still not doing it. Either way, okay. So if I grab this thing, how do I know if this is actually broken? Well, if I grab this constraint, do you see over here where it says center hips and leg, left leg on here? These, oh, I see what I did. I grabbed the pad. Okay, I know I said that, but it's like this. So if I grab the pad, it's doing, see how the pad's moving the system? Okay, that's why it's doing it. So it is breaking. Okay, so if I go in here, you'll see that you have this, these are what are called our weight targets here. We have our center hips 1 bind and our left leg 0, pad. So this is telling me that these are both 100% on here. So if I didn't want my leg to move with it, I could 0 this out. And now that would not be influencing at all. So if I go and press up here, even though it turns purple, you see how it's not moving anything right here? So you could see the constraints. Typically what I do is if I had this problem, I would delete the constraint and do it again. But I wanted to show you that if you select something that has influences onto it, like the pad, you can even look down here and see, here's our influences here on there. So you can see what is actually connecting and driving this. So think of this as being, one as being like 100% on there. So you can actually do 100 on both, which will mean it'll be halfway and everything like that. So we do not want to do that. What we want to do is we want to grab our driver and then our pad and then do, that's not our pad, and do apply, like that. And then we grab our driver again, which is our hip, and then our other pad, and hit apply. And now when I grab my leg joints, you see how everything moves back and forth. Okay? Cool. Last one I want to show is I want to go into the arms, and I want to talk about this one because this one's a little different, but not that much. So let's go into connect arms. This testing is all messed up. Okay, so you do need to connect each one of your finger pads to your end of your hand. Okay? Then we need to grab our arm waist and actually connect it. Let's see. Upper outline. Still can't make it smaller. It's fine. So we grab the end of our arm waist and we're going to say our hand is our driven. So this is our driver, this is our driven, and we hit apply. You'll notice that when I do this, I always just apply and then I grab my joint and kind of move it to make sure everything's moving together properly. I've seen students that accidentally will connect the arm root to this stuff and it looks like it's working properly, but unless they grab like the elbow, they won't see it move. So our shoulder, it's going to be our driver here, and our driven is going to be our arm, and I hit apply, like that. See how it's moving up like that? Finally, what do I connect our clavicle pad to? What's our driver for this? Which one in our back? Is it the last joint in our back, or is it the one right before it? It's the one right before it because it's everything it's influenced. This is past that influence. So think of this as saying, I control everything here. This is a whole nother world on here. So that's what, sometimes I see people connected to the neck, and that's really wrong because if you think about it, when I turn my neck, my shoulders don't move. Not all the time, at least. So this is our driver, and our driven is our pad and our clavicle. Apply. That's the only one I see people really make mistakes on. You see how it all moves like that. Play around with it as you go along. Don't run to the back of the book for the answers. Check it and validate yourself to see, is it working properly? Is this doing what it's supposed to be doing? Okay? I've been going over this pretty slow on here. I mean, not necessarily slow as I'm going it, but I've been taking my time. This doesn't take very long. This whole process normally doesn't take more than an hour to do for the whole body. Because it's once you've done it, it's the same thing. The more likely thing you're going to do is accidentally select the wrong thing and do a constraint and everything like that. Because you get in this malaise of doing the same thing over and over again. You're going to miss one. Yes? Constraints don't mirror. So you do have to do it on the other side. Again, redundancy screams out tools. I will always say, look, if I have to do this over and over and over again, I know that everything has a 0, 1 on my joints needs a pad. So I can make a button that creates pads for everything. So I'm going to say that it's like it would be really nice that if I mimic what's on the right side or the left side and put it on the left side onto it. I have a pattern there. It's not different. So that is something I can make a tool for in the future onto it. So that when you get that irritants on that, that's actually a good thing. That means I can make tools for this. And when you work in a studio, how many times your biped rig is going to differ from one another? They're going to be very similar. So why am I going to rig the same character over and over and over and over and over again? Why don't I just make a button that I can change my joints proportions on it and then hit another button to rig the joints and the system onto it? An arm is going to be an arm. It's going to have 3 joints in it. A leg's going to have 5 joints in it. I'm not changing that. Unless a character has 6 arms or something like that. But even that, it's the same system onto it. I'm going to probably build tools. What you want to do is that weird system where he has like a second head growing out of his neck. I want to rig all the base stuff first and then add that on top of it. I don't have to do the body on that character, with redundancy on it. We will build tools. When you go to a studio, they will probably have buttons to do a lot of this stuff. Hence, though, you still got to know how to build this stuff, because if you don't have that, or you need to reverse engineer something, you've got to know a long way of doing it. So as much as there's buttons to do it, getting too reliant on those buttons can be a problem. I can't tell you how many times I have people that have worked at big studios that come here and ask me to make them tools that they've had at the studio. I had a student, and I had a coworker. He worked at Blue Sky, and they had a button that created really awesome light. Like it just gave a great initial lighting, like a natural room lighting onto it. It says, "Could you make that button for me?" I'm like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what. Like I can't see it. Like you'd have to show it to me." And they probably had a team of people building that, because it's something they use in all their this is photo. This is Blue Sky, so it's like their lighting is amazing. So that type of stuff does happen and everything like that. Okay. So any questions on the connections online or anything? Corinne, are you good with that? Okay, cool. Awesome. So that's now the connections, the padding connections were 20% of your grade. At this point, that's 80% of your grade right there. That's why I said if you have your joints laid out, you could pretty much jump to 80% in the first hour when you get into normal lab. That's why I'm not really that worried about you finishing everything in time today. I wouldn't have signed that if I thought you guys couldn't finish it onto it. At the very least, if you're behind, the extra time you put from 9 to midnight, you should be able to finish it within that extra time as well. So like I said, burn them in out a little bit today so we can push forward and have a nice, relaxing month for the rest of the month, not a crazy sprint to the end. Okay, I rather much fight the slow, rambling zombies than the fast, crazy ones. So, it's like, yes, I know superior numbers and everything like that, but I don't want those fast, crazy zombies. Those suck. Exactly. Okay, so now I want to talk about controls. So I do have a bunch of podcasts and stuff on the controls, so I'm not going to spend an insane amount of time on this, on the fundamentals, especially since the integrated learning, you focused on creating some controls and things like that on top of that. But I am going to go over some basics on here, and I'm going to go over to create more complex controls. I'm not going to be very picky on the shape of your controls in class. As long as you can see it and select it easily, I'm going to be pretty much okay with it. If you want to go crazy and make cool designs, like I had one student that made skulls for all his controls, that's fine. I'll probably tell you the animator is going to try to kill you if you do that, but I won't count off again. I want you guys to have fun with it. I'll definitely, when we critique it, say, yeah, you don't want to, that's cute, don't do that. So, okay. So, creating basic controls. The most easy control to create is just the circle, NURBS circle, because it satisfies a lot of different things. It's an easy single selection. It does not render out. And you can see it from every vantage point. So it's a really nice control. So we use circles for a lot of things. You can also grab the CVs and change it to things. Like you can grab the beginning like this, grab the ones, and now you get a pointer. Or you can grab every other CV in here and scale it in and make like a spur, like that, or a flower. If you increase the sections to like 16, you can grab every other CV in this one, just like we did on the spur, and this will create like a flower. And this is actually a control I use a lot, like that. because it's very distinctive. Yes?
What does curve be good for?
To simulate motion when you're doing stuff like that. Circles don't simulate motion very good at all because they look like, well, oh, they actually look kind of cool. New shape! But you can do stuff like this. You see, you can't see it moving around. Now, granted, I have the geometry around, things like that, but I like to have that type of motion. I do like to have curved objects and then rigid objects to show difference in systems. Like IK systems that grab arms, I normally do rigid objects. And FK systems are rotations, I do curved everything. Yes, we will be going over binding. Yes, after this we'll go over binding. We've got plenty of time, so we're doing good. Okay, so creating, if I go into if I actually go into my curve tool, and I go into my CV curve tool options here, I can actually create curves by clicking. Now it's in cubic, so I can do this type of stuff, and I hit enter. That technically could be a curve or control icon, but I normally like to actually have it in linear, so I can snap them down. So I hold down X, and I snap, and I'm snapping to my grid right now, and you can see I can just make a square, like that. See? Two-dimensional. How do I make a three-dimensional? I'm just going to create a polygon cube, and the reason why I create a polygon cube is I can snap to the CVs on, snap to the verts on this. So I can actually go in and hold down V, and I can snap, 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 snap. Now I know if you guys are Cracker Barrel fans, and you have played those foxes and hens, or foxes and sheep, and you're trying to jump over and not select on the same thing again, you can't mathematically do that. And you could trace over this bad boy 9 times, and it wouldn't even think twice in adopting memory. So don't go crazy with trying not to overlap. It'll be more irritating if you miss an edge and have to redo it than everything. I'm on a good hot streak. I think 9 months in a row I haven't accidentally missed a spot on it. That drives me crazy. Cool. Now, we did those in the integrated exercises and things like that. What we didn't cover on those was making more complex shapes. So what I like to do to make complex shapes is you can combine shapes together, or you can trace over shapes onto it. So if I create a polygon plane like that, and I have way too many points of reference on here, so I can just knock these down to both ones on the subdivisions like that. And then I can go in and I can duplicate this and kind of bring it out like that and kind of scale it up. Scale this one down like this. And then scale the front of this like so. And you see how it's kind of overlapping a little bit? Now when I go to my CV curve tool, I can hold down V, and you can see how I can snap to these points on here. See like that? I don't need these guys in the middle anymore. I got a little swept design. And you can always modify this after the fact. The thing I like to do is I don't keep creating curves over and over again. I create the curves I need for my rig, and I make them like palette tools. I put them down, and I just duplicate off from them, so I don't have to recreate them over and over and over again. So I can actually change this and modify this. Okay. Cool. Okay, that being said, there's a problem with this arrow. Is that it's two-dimensional. You see how it kind of disappears when I put it on the side on here? So yes, I can duplicate this and then actually put it here. Now this one's definitely something new. I do have a podcast on this. It's called Combining Shapes. But we haven't really talked about this yet, so let's get ahead. So you see how now it's kind of like a three-dimensional object? I don't want to trace over this. It's going to be a pain in the butt. So I wish I had a way of combining these. And we do have a way of doing that. So I'm going to show you that now. Okay, so how do I combine these shapes? Well, I go into my outliner. Okay. And the key thing here is I need to freeze transforms on both of these first. Okay. So I'm going to say modify freeze transforms. Like that. Okay. Now I'm going to create a blank group with nothing selected. Like that. And when we parent things, we can parent, these are what are called transforms. These are the things you can select. Pretty much transforms are the translate, rotate, and scale. Okay? Anything you pretty much select in the 3D environment to move it around, Those are transforms. But if I go into display, there's an area called shapes. Shapes are the thing you see. So the CVs, or verts, edges, or faces are the actual shapes. So if I go in here, you see how I see these little shape nodes here on here? I can parent shape nodes to another group on here. But you can't do this by just hitting P. There's actually a special command under parent to do this. So I select my first shape, my second shape, and then finally the parent group. Okay? And then I go down to my mail area down here, and I'm going to type the keyword parent. By default, this does not parent shape nodes. So I have to tell it. If I put -R and -S, -R stands for relative and -S stands for shape. If I run this now and I hit enter, you'll notice that now when I click away and I click on this object, you see how it's a single selection now? It's not multiples. If I click off my display shape, now you see a single little null on there, and you can grab and move this guy around. Okay? Do you have to create shapes like this? No. But it does make nicer shapes. This leads into how do I create text and complicate things. You see text in a lot of my examples and things like that. How do I make those controls? So let's say I had like left eye or something like that I wanted to put above. I wanted to label something. There's actually a new tool. The actual podcast on there now is old, so I'm telling you guys online. It is actually pretty old, the new one on here. But this tool is really, really awesome. Maybe tonight or tomorrow, I'll create a new podcast for this. So if I go into type, there's a command that allows us to actually bring up this whole little interface. This is all new. So you see, it just generated this whole bunch of text. 3D type. The weird thing is before it used to bring up a little prompt that you typed in what you want to type, you hit a button and went through. It's all dynamic now on here. So if I go into type mesh on here, actually it might be on here, I have to find it. Oh, it's under type 1. If I go into type 1, you see it says 3D type. Let's say I call this rabbit rig or something like that. So you see it says that out there. I can do alignment on here. I can change my font size on here. I can do, I can really adjust anything on this. I don't even know what that is. The kind of cool thing is if I go into the 3D area on this, where is it? Forget if it's. Oh, if I go into geometry, I can actually change how my bevel is on this stuff. See? You can change your text really easily in here too. You can go in here and say, okay, what's my text? Yeah, it's going to be tough on some of these. You got to go through. Yeah. Oh, let's do Chinese. It's not going to look good. Actually, it might. Let's see. Oh, look, it's not Chinese. It lied to us. It probably is not. It's probably just a... you want to do wingdings? Go, sure, fine. I normally do that to troll people. It doesn't even say wingdings. It just says it in here. Yeah, it looks pretty cool, actually.
I like that. It's just little sentences. Yeah. Or I use it to insult people.
So it does have a really cool thing where you can go through. This has a whole animation system in it now. But here's the thing is, I don't really want text on here. I don't want geometry like this. I want to actually have this to be curves. So if I go down, I think, is it down here? I always forget where it is. Oh yeah, it even has a bevel in here too. So, that's actually pretty awesome. But that being the case, I really not interested in this. I think it might be under text. Nope. Type manipulator. Nope. This is how often I use this. I have to. Oh, there we go. So down here, the whole wingdings thing, the whole, like, it'll still do wingdings, but it won't do the nice beveling now. I want to generate curves from this. Guys, focus, focus. I want to generate curves from this type. So I click this button, and you'll see below here, it creates this thing down here. I'm going to delete this guy. And you see there's my curves. Now these are control icons. That is actually a damn nice curve. I like that one very much. Honestly, I just want that one. I don't care about the rest of these. So, hey, let's say I do that. I want to create that as my curve. That'd be a really cool pointer. I can go in here. I can create a group, an empty group here. I can select these guys here. I need to unparent these, so I hit Shift-P. I'm going to freeze them. And then I'm going to do that whole parent thing. I'm going to turn this into shapes. Child, child shape, parent. And then I just press up in my mel group to bring that parent command back. Boom. See? Yes, I could do the whole thing too. So if I grab all of these shapes here, I hit Shift-P to unparent them, and I freeze them. And now I'm going to create an empty group like this. And now I have to go through, and I do have my shape still turned on. So yeah, I have to go through. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure I get all of them. It's all these guys, right? Yes. Okay, so I got to select all the shape nodes on these guys, which kind of stinks. Yeah, it gets a lot of shape nodes. But I'm doing this for you. You're going to like the next thing I show you. Okay. Click, click. Now I'm grabbing all the shape nodes. Oh, I do have to freeze transforms on it. Oh, I did freeze transform. Never mind, I did freeze them. Okay. Click, click, click. Guys, focus. I select my pad at the end. I'm going to press up in my mel area. Hit enter. Boom, I got that. I turned my shape node off. And this is the really cool thing on here. So now I got a single shape for this. See? Yes, I can go and I can actually change and modify these guys independently. But here's the thing that's really cool. Let's say I want to warp this around a circle, which is a pain in the butt. There's this whole set of deformers called nonlinear deformers. Let's see, they're right here, nonlinear deformers. So I'm going to expand this, bring this out. And I can do bend. And you see I get this little deformer here. Now, it's not going to do what we want it to do right now. If I open my channel box and I go into bend 2, I can change the curve. And you see how it kind of warps like this? What it's doing, it's dynamically warping this based on this curve. But if I rotate this around, I can scale this down or up. Like if I scale this down and I increase my bounds around like this, see? I can also animate this. Like that. And then when I'm done, I can just select my shape node or my transform on this and just freeze it. Or actually, sorry, delete history. I delete history and then boom, there it is. So center pivot on there. So it looks like some alien like trade shop. There. So you could do a lot of different things. And those nonlinear deformers, you can do flares, you can do sine waves. So if I wanted to flare this one up a little bit so it was higher, it was wider at the top and at the bottom, I can do that. I can open up my curve like that. Mm-hmm. Where do you think it came from? You see how it animates through like that? So you can do, hey, here's a cool thing is, who said this had to be on curves? You can do this on your geometry and your character too.
So cool. What?
So you can do sine waves, you can do twists, so it'll twist and twirl as it goes through things. This can be applied to your whole character, and the best part about these things is not only are they animatable, they sit on top of your system. Water. Like let's say you were doing a logo underneath something and you want it to ripple. You know, you can do lots of different things. Best part about this, they're non-destructive, so you don't like it, you hit delete and it goes back to where it was before. If you do like it, then you just freeze transforms on the object, or delete history on the object, and boom. I could even go in there and you can increase your bands on here. So you can make one of these bands wider than the other one. So I can do the high band and turn this off or on like this. So let's say I want the top to be more beveled than the bottom. So I can do stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of work you can do on that. Again, the same with combining on it. Do you need to do advanced controls like this? No. I will tell you there is kind of a catch-22 with these type of controls. It was an old school rigging hazing trick, is that when they saw people on demo reels that had these really advanced controls, like I had a student, he modeled Africa because he had a giraffe, and he wanted to be sitting on top of Africa. And I gave him crap because I said his geography sucked because he didn't have Madagascar on there. But that's not what I was really joking at. A lot of times back, what you'd have in the industry is that people would ask you, say, wow, those are really cool curves. How long did it take you to make that? It's a huge, huge alarm bell setting off. Because what they want you to say is, wow, I spent like hours on doing that because I spent a lot of time on that. Because I had one student, he made parrots for the character shoulders because he had a pirate. So you want to have parrots on each shoulders for the controls. But if you're spending hours upon hours making your control icons that literally have almost no purpose other than what a circle could do for your character, they're saying, why are you spending an hour or 2 hours on your controls when you could be rigging? You could be working onto it. Now, my response to that would be, oh, I just threw an Illustrator. I took a curve off the line and generated it from Illustrator and brought it in as an Illustrator file. And your reaction probably is, wait, you can bring Illustrator files into Maya? Oh, come on. You telling me you guys never saw this Adobe Illustrator object set sitting under Crate forever? And you're like, what the hell is that in there for? So that's actually allows you to import Illustrator files because they're Bezier curves. And that whole thing, now I turn their trap into a benefit because I showed off that I'm like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. It's like, exactly. Gotcha. And go from there. Okay. That control is not simple to use. There's a little finagling on that thing too. I think actually last time I used it, you had to use Illustrator 9 files. So you had to actually, when you're in CS6 or whatever insane version it is now, you'd have to tell it to save out as a 9 to be able to go back into there, but we'll go from there. Okay, cool. You guys have any question about creating control icons? Hopefully you got a lot of ideas and everything on there. And a lot of this is trailing into week 2. Week 1, circles work great, and blocks and things like that work great for that stuff. Okay. So I'm going to go to the next example. I'm not going to go over constraints because that's already we pretty much had that enough onto. If anybody has any questions on constraints, let me know. But I do have a podcast that goes over that in much more detail. I just want to go into the back controls, and I want to make sure you guys are all comfortable doing back controls on this. And I saw a whole bunch of people online that already got this done and everything like this. So I want to make sure I have enough time to go over some blocking out weights and binding on here, which I should have plenty of time to do that. So I'll go to my back icons. Now, this is actually a very important point that I put. When I'm doing my demos in class, if you want to follow along, if you ever get lost during an area when I'm doing this, my next scene will normally have the components already built for you. So you don't have, we're not building upon one and going on. So if you're lost, you're gone. I figure you guys have gone over controls. If you're struggling on it, you'll know where to look for watching podcasts on that and to re-update. And hopefully you'll message me and ask me, I'm still struggling on this, and kind of go from there, or ask David on that. That being said, I have my control icons here. This is my little palette tools. And we need to make control icons. So why do we make control icons in the first place? Who can answer that? Why can't I just animate a joint?
It's easier to manipulate.
It is, but why? What is bad about a joint?
You can't have it in perspective.
You can, but you have weird values, don't you? Can you just zero this out?
No.
No, it breaks everything. So these values are never going away. You can't freeze transforms on these. They're inside the geometry. They're hard to see. Yeah, so there's all types of badness on this. The big part of rigging is making simple systems that are very simple for the animator to use. Your car is made up of very complicated components, but your radio, you press a button, it turns it on. You don't worry about what happens to turn that radio on unless it breaks. That's what the setup bar is there. That's what the engineer is there for. So that's what we want to build controls for here. So we're actually mimicking a system that already exists because this system is not a good system for us to animate. Just like with your car, could you hotwire your car every day to start it?
Yes.
Yes. Is that a smart thing? No. Or is it yes? I was knew somebody was going to say that. I'm like, no, you wouldn't want to do that because you'll probably break your car.
Yes.
So yes. So I'm going to hide my geometry, and we have a couple rules we need to go on here. We're mimicking each one of these back joints to start off with. So what joints do we need controls? Anything that says the word bind, because it's going to move geometry. And hence, the actor, the animator is going to be able to move the character he wants the geometry to move. So our first back joint, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, not the seventh. Then our neck, then our head, and then so forth. We're not doing our arms, we're not doing our fingers this week. Then when we start project 2, we'll do the arms and the legs on here. We're just focusing on the back to get you introduced to it. So all these need it. So some rules. When you create a control icon, by far the most important rule is that excuse me, is that the pivot point is exactly mimicking the joint we're going to control. Why? Because our joints are rotating around a central point here. If your pivot point's a little off, it's going to orbit around that area. So it's kind of like if you have your tires aren't balanced properly, it's a bad thing. So I'm going to take my circles. I always say that, and every time I say that, has anybody seen a death wobble on a Jeep before?
Yes.
Isn't that the worst thing in the world to see? I had a friend at a Jeep who goes, oh yeah, it's a death wobble, it happens. I'm like, what? It's pretty much when your tires in your Jeep kind of swerve back and forth like on the, it's crazy. I saw that on university. I was driving with a friend, and I was like, what the hell's wrong with that Jeep? And he goes, oh, it's a death wobble. Like it was nothing. And I was like, what? And people, it was one of the old school Jeeps, you know, like the off-roader Jeeps and everything.
It happens a lot in the Army Humvees.
Really?
Yeah.
God, I saw that, I said, never buying that vehicle. That was like, check that right off of my head. So, you know, you just kind of keep going and it rattles itself out. And I'm like, okay. It's creepy. Okay, so I'm going to take this circle, and it's like, I don't know why I always think about that. I was like, wow, rotating and balance the tires in the wrong direction. So I'm going to take this circle, which is really nice because it encapsulates this area. Why? Because when we look at our geometry, you see how it actually will whirl around it like a hula hoop? That's good. It means it's visible from many angles. It's easy to see. So let's get that pivot point right on top of that joint first. So I'm just going to hold down V and snap it right into position like that. That's good. That is probably one of my biggest things I get irritated about with controls, that the pivot point's not on the joint. Now this is for rotational or FK controls. That's all we're doing today. Next class, we're going to talk about IKs, which kind of change that rule and everything like that. So I'm going to make one of these for each one of the targeted joints. I'm going to duplicate it and snap it up. Oop, I missed one. Let's move that down. Remember, we don't want the waist because they're not controlling geometry. I'm going to do one for the neck too. I'm going to stop there, okay? First rule, pivot point needs to be on there. Second rule, is it visible? Is it nicely visible? Now you see how some of these controls are kind of sticking into the body? How frustrating it is to have trouble grabbing controls on your rigs. So this guy's a little bit close to skin. How irritating is it accidentally select a geometry instead of the control? Yep, make it a little bigger. Not, if you make it too big, then it ruins that whole thing. It goes, you know, bigger is not always better, which I found out with the 3D printer one of I bought. SLA printers that are really large, not a good thing. Much harder to work with. Okay. Now we're starting to get our controls are getting a little too big. Like I don't want to do this for a neck. Here, can I do this? But what do I have to do to fix that? Because the pivot point's off. Can I just move the pivot point down? Yeah. Because the visual, the circle means nothing. You remember I said the middle pivot point is everything? This is only just a visual aid. Technically, you could have a separate little dot, and that would be the same thing. It would be an awful control if it was like that, unless you hate your animators. But that's fine, as long as you move the pivot point back. Okay? So. Oh, here's another little quick rule, or not necessarily rule. If I go into CVs on here, I can actually move these around at any time, including when it's connected. So if you wanted to actually, so if you wanted to move it up, like this, and you wanted to scale it in like that, you're like, oh, that had to mess the pivot point up. No. CVs are shape nodes, not the pivot point. So you can move that around at any time. Okay? Even when they're connected, which is kind of crazy on it. Most things you can't do that with. Okay, so then I got my head. Why a cube? Well, not for the head. It's easy to see. Feet. Do not rig the feet. Not this day. Thursday. So, could I do a circle? Yeah, I could do a circle. The only thing is, if I do a circle, I normally make it like a halo above its head. If you see that, you're going to know it's the head. That's what you want. Don't be cute. Be obvious. It should kind of stick out. I've done horns. I've done horns and everything on that. Well, cute makes the animator angry at you. And it follows by blood loss after that. No, because animators are crazy. I know we got a bunch of animators in here. There's an old, it's an old rule I've never seen. It's like, I've never seen an animator that's not crazy, but I've never seen a setup artist on a complete jerk as well. So that goes both ways. I always say, you know, it's like you never want to be trapped with an animator in a phone booth in a knife fight. They're very wily. You never know what they're going to do. They might stab themselves, but you never know. What's wrong with this control? Nah, I'm okay with that, because you can still select everything else. The pivot's in the wrong spot, yes. So I hide my geometry, hold down D and V, boom, like that. See? Like, which? Yeah. Okay. You guys good online? I'm kind of speeding through. I know most of you guys, like I said, had this done already. You have any questions on control so far or anything like that? Okay, awesome. Cool. Okay, so the last one I want is the hip. I'm going to do another box of this. Why don't I want to just do another circle? Yeah, it's going to get confusing. You're going to see it, and I'm sorry, but if you see, if I can get this around right. If I scale this out and make these kind of like underwear, like let's say I grab the CVs below here. Are you going to get that confused, with your hip confused with your back? Probably not. Okay. Again, we do need to have the pivot point in the right spot. Like that. Okay. So the pivot points are good. The controls are visible. What's next? What's also wrong with these controls? And that's true, but there's one other thing. Are these controls that you'd want to animate because you're an animator? They need to be frozen. They got weird values on them. So let's grab those and freeze them. Modify freeze transforms. Now they're ready. And yes, you do need to connect them in. That's the next thing. Okay. Cool. So now I need to name them. These are what the animator sees, so I want to have this as clear as possible. This is our center head icon. So I do a suffix as icon on here. This is my neck. I don't have to put a number on here because there's only one neck control. These ones do need to be numbered. This is our first back, center back 01 icon. Center back 02 icon. center back, O3 icon, center back, O4 icon, center back, O5, and then finally our last one, center back 6. So that's one of the big things I'm looking for when I build your controls. Are they clean? Are the pivot points set? Are they named? And then finally, are they connected together properly? Okay? If you're following along on here, I did a bunch of stuff on there. The next scene on here, I'm not going to jump in here, but you could jump into the next one, which is back icons placed. So it means that's going to be the one where we're going to connect everything together. Okay, so I want to parent these together. The very top of our system is our head. Everything has to move. No matter which one of these controls is animated, the head has to move. So the next one underneath it is the neck. So I'm just going to move my head underneath my neck. I'm parenting, normal parenting. So see if I grab my neck. See? Then the next one under here is the next back one right underneath it. So I'm just going to take my neck, the middle mouse drag it right underneath there like that. Cool. Boom, boom, boom. And I just follow up. Back 6 goes under back 5. See? 5 goes under 4. 4 goes under 3. You see how we're getting a step ladder effect here? 3 goes under 2. Oops. 3 goes under 2. And 2 goes under 1. So it looks like this. God damn it. It's Autodesk. It's like tasking me. Okay, so see, we get this. Now we do not want to connect the hip into this. So I didn't name the hip. Center hip. But you see how they're all moving together? Okay. Cool. What is this mimicking? It's mimicking the same structures here. You see how our back is all like, it looks like the same staircase going down like this? These controls should have that same. We're mimicking this system to here because these are not animatable. Damn, you're here early today. Okay, so we got our controls. The last step is connecting, like you mentioned on here. So we're just going to do a constraint. Why? Because we don't want to parent these guys together because it's going to break that indirect hierarchy. We don't want to change the hierarchy. We want to use a constraint to have this system mimic the system underneath it. So we're going to say driver and driven. I go into my constraints. I go into parent. And we're just going to say driver. And then our driven is going to be our joint. And apply. This should be a pretty quick process. I do suggest when you're first doing this to grab the system and kind of check to see if it's working. Now, like I mentioned before, unless you've done binding already, the geometry will not move with your character. This is an extra credit part where we do the proxy. You do have the option to do proxy as an extra credit. You can get 10 extra points on here. If you look in our lecture notes, it's right here. It says extra credit. So if you wanted to get some extra time on there, you could put those in. It probably won't take you more than an hour to do it. Maybe an hour and a half, depends how fast you are onto it. So if you kind of get stuff done, I do have people that get it done in lab as well. So can go from there. It would be nice if you had extra time, like you had the weekend and everything, but like I said, this week is all messed up. Okay, so we kind of go down the body. That's our head. Then we do our neck, that's our driver, and our driven is our neck joint here, and I hit apply. And we keep on going through, driver, driven, apply. And we can see, we move this, oh, I didn't actually click the button on that. Apply, there we go, boom. Okay, driver, driven, apply, and I can just go through each one. When I'm really comfortable, I'm doing this right, I can kind of fly through these. But you should always double check each control to make sure that everything is moving the correct thing properly. Kind of running low on time too. Gotta make sure I get to that. Let's get to this binding and hit apply like that. So see now when I move it through, so it moves the lower body, this moves the upper body, and I could grab these in sequence. I can just hold down Shift and select these guys. And you can see when I rotate them, see, I twist, or I can do this, or I can like Cirque du Soleil. Okay, so we're almost done with that. The idea, if you know how to set up one control, you should be able to know set up the whole system. They're all the same things. The next trick is to make sure you know your hierarchy. but your joints are already in the hierarchy they're supposed to. So just look at those and say, my control should look like that. If they don't, they go through. You're rigging here, props. If you want to rig a baseball bat and you want to make the baseball bat curve as he swings it, or maybe you want to do like Reinhold where he has this big hammer type of thing where the hammer will adjust or split open type of thing, it's the same thing on here. We're doing offsets on here. So that being said, you want to build a control that manipulates a joint in the system. And this is the thing, we want to rotate it. Next class, we'll talk about translating and doing like elbows and things like that. But this, you can also rig antennas like this, tails like this. There's a lot of different systems this can work for. Fingers, your fingers can be rigged like this too. The last one on here is I don't want to connect the hips and the back together like this. I want to be able to move these separate because like I'm sitting now, if I rock forward and back, I want to be able to keep my hips locked onto on my chair. But I also want to be able to get up. That means I have to move them together because honestly, I don't want to be accidentally do this. Now, we work in a weird industry, you know, zombies running with half their bodies and everything. It could be possible that we have a character where his upper part and lower part of his body separate away from each other. So I don't know. It's the worst superpower ever. His upper body just flops out from his lower body. He just wiggles around the ground and everything. You think Aquaman was the worst superhero ever. Okay, so now I need to have a center of gravity control, which I'm just going to create a circle. I'm going to increase the sections to 16. I know I'm going a little fast on this. I want to make sure I get to the binding stuff. So I'm going to grab every other CV on here. Click, 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 click. Whoop. Okay, I'm going to scale it out like that, make my little star. Why a star? Because it's going to be right on the hip. I want to make sure that it doesn't get confused with any other systems. I also like to make giant buff characters and give them like tutus and things like that. Give them like dresses. So are you ever going to get confused with your center of gravity compared to your hip compared to your back? Not like that. Nothing's more frustrating to have a circle, circle, circle. I'm sure you guys have seen those before. And it's like, what controls what? You know, a lot of what we do is trying to make telegraphing what we're doing for the animator. You're only going to see it when you're rigging it. The animator's going to see it a lot longer than you are. So I'm going to freeze transforms on this. I'm going to make sure my history is deleted. So I say edit, delete by type history. By the way, guys, it's not going to be the first time I say this. The delete all by type is the devil. It will delete everything in your scene that you hold dear in rigging. Because there's lots of things that you're doing that are dedicated that will get destroyed. Like your bind will get destroyed if you delete all by type. And you're probably saying, I'm not going to select on that. If you made a button in MCR to delete all history, you'll probably click that and ruin everything. Get rid of that button now and regenerate it with the delete by type. It won't hurt this month as long as you don't do it after you put your bind on it. But when you get on to like week 3, it'll cause a disaster, and week 4 will really be bad. I will constantly scream at you to fix that. So this is our center gravity, center cog, center gravity icon, like that. And this is going to be parented. This is going to be the base of both these systems. I'm just going to grab both the back and the hips and parent it under the cog. Not constrain it, but parent it. So you see I can go grab both of them. Yes, we're not rigged to arm yet. See? You got to really push the thing because it's like you don't know if it's working if you just do this. If you go like this. You know, really hammer it around, kind of go crazy on it. Yes, I know. It's like The Sims. Somewhere in Arizona, some person has his ladder of his pool disappear. You're like, what? So, okay, cool. That's actually 15% of your grade doing the controls. Again, it doesn't take very long. It's long. The bigger time is if you're not testing as you go along, you might make a mistake and not know you're doing that. Okay? And without haste, I want to go into binding. I got some requests online to go over some binding on here. The binding we're going to do is we're 5% of your grade. We're only doing what's called a test bind or a blockout weighting on here. I'm not even really crazy on you guys doing a full blockout on here. I just want you to be able to get the initial, like, hey, I'm blocking out weight and things like that. For your campus guys, I'm going to have an integrated exercise that goes over blocking out weights. So, but like I said, I had some people online that wanted to see it. So I'm going to go into my next scene, and I'm going to go into test bind, and I'm going to go into the no bind on here. Okay, cool. So this character right here, I've only got the upper part of the body on here. So how do I bind a material or bind geometry? Now the whole purpose of binding is we're going to take our joints and we're going to connect it to the geometry. That's what binding means. We're trying to move the vertices with our joints, okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to select all our joints. Now this is a stripped down version. Everything that says the word bind, it needs to be selected here. So like bind, 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 irritating, irritating, irritating. Is there a faster way of doing this? Yes. There's this little field up here that I can click on here, and it's a select by name. By default, it's rename. Be careful with that. You don't want to rename everything in your scene. Select by name, and if I type in asterisk or shift 8, this little guy, and put *_bind, it'll select everything with the suffix bind. That's why we've been naming our things like this. It allows me to grab them. By the way, when you start putting icons on your controls, you can make a button that keyframes all your stuff with _icon on them too. That's one of the benefits of naming all your stuff like that. So I hit this and boom, all my joints are selected, and you see? Nothing with waste is selected. Binding is selecting your joints, selecting your geometry after the fact. Yes, I will be saving the meeting one. So I'll hold down Shift, and also I'm going to try to get this up. I'm going to go right back to my desk after this, and I'm going to render it out, and I'm going to try to get up before I leave today. Okay, so joints first, then our geometry, and I'm going to go into Skin, Bind, and I'm going to go to the options. Now, in the podcast, I cover a lot more on these different binding methods. I'm going to go into Edit, but the very, very important thing you need to know is by default, you need to switch from joint hierarchy to selected joints on here, okay? And the next ones are bind method. There's 4 bind methods. Distance, which pretty much what distance does is it radiates our weighting away around like a sphere outside of this. This is not a good weighting method. The next one is hierarchy. It looks at the hierarchy and tries to bind towards the hierarchy. This one's okay. Heat map is good because what it does is shoots ray traces out and says how far they are away to how the vertices are actually connected to the geometry. And voxel of here puts little voxels and fills out the surface similar like the ray traces onto it. Here's the thing is, I don't care about any of these weighting methods. You know why? Because we're going to obliterate them in the very beginning. They're all terrible. The only time they're good is when you're doing very simple props. Like later on in the month when we rig a tongue, the initial weighting actually pretty much weights the tongue perfectly. But it's pretty rare when you do a character. Anything that have limbs or branches doesn't do a good job with it. So normally these are all terrible. So I just go into hierarchy because it's by far the fastest one to use. And I'm going to hit apply. The only other thing I select on here, I turn off, is there's this maintain max influences. I turn this off on there. I'm going to talk about that on week 3 a lot more. So I say bind, and you'll notice see, it goes through. And you're like, oh my God, that's terrible. That's not what I'm looking for on it. I'm just going to go through this. So we got our initial weighting on here, okay? Cool. And if any of you guys online have still struggle with this after the fact, I will be at my desk rendering this out. So if you have any other questions, I can answer that too. If there's anything I don't cover here, it doesn't fill anything out. So you can hit me up on Slack right when we're done, and I can jump online with you guys too if you need to go more detail on this. I think after I cover this, you guys will be good though. Okay, so that being said, we need to actually block this weighting out. What I mean by blocking out is that we're resetting our weights. So if I select on my geometry and I actually want to go into my weighting mode, I have 2 ways of doing that. I can go to skin, and I go into paint skin weights, and I go into the options. This is the long way of doing it. It's the one that always works. The faster way sometimes doesn't actually go into weighting mode for some unknown reason. So I go in here and it goes in our weighting mode. And this, you'll see this like here, like that. You see a little gradient. I can click through and I can see all these like this. I'm going to talk about what the white represents in a little bit. Okay, the other way of getting into the weighting is by selecting on the geometry here, selecting on the geometry, and holding a right click and going to paint skin weights, like this. That's the faster way. Sometimes it breaks. These are all our influences here. I can jump between an influence by two ways. I can go and click here, or I can hold down right click over a joint and slide up. This fast method breaks from time to time. Sometimes you can click and accidentally go to lock influence, which will mean you can't weight it. The worst part about this is it'll look like you're weighting it, and then when you select it back, it won't have any weight. And you'll see it, do this. See the little gold lock? That's evil. Okay, so one of the things I want you to do is it's called blocking out weighting. Because that initial weighting is bad, we want to reinitialize all the weighting for a character and reestablish those. Okay? So how do I do that? Well, first thing is, normally with your character, you'll go to the hip. I don't have a hip on this character, so I'm going to go down to this guy. You pick a joint, and that's going to be your base influence on here. So I go into my weights on here. I'm going to select my influence down here, and I want to flood all my weights to this joint. So how do I do that? Well, that comes down to this part here. We want to be on replace. We want to be on our solid brush here. And we want to make sure our value is 1. When we flood, it's going to flood all our weights. Now, what am I talking about? You see how we see this grayscale up here? Pretty much each one of these vertices, think of them as little spheres. And those spheres can be parented to objects. The white is telling me how much this influence. Right now, these vertices are probably around 80 to 70% influenced by this joint here. If I move up, you see how it's all gray here? There's about 50% on it. Watch what happens when I flood on my first back one. See how it turns white? That means the entire character is completely flooded to that joint. So if I move any other joint around, see how nothing moves? But if I grab here, see how everything moves with this character? Like that? Okay? So now what I want to do is I want to start blocking this out. I'm going to start with the hand here. Actually, we can go from the back. We can go up like this. Actually, no, I am going to go with the hand. Now, the same thing with the finger. So what I want to do here is I'm going to go into this hand here. I'm going to go to this influence. You see how I still got the little R. How do you increase the size of your brush in Maya? Hold down B. Okay? So I'm on that. Now watch what happens when I paint. You see how it's painting across like that? Like this. And I'm going to move past my influence marker. I want to move past, because right now, it's really only, the hand is only supposed to be weighted to here. It really doesn't supposed to be painted to the wrist. But when you're painting, let's say you're painting your house, like you're painting a wall in your house. You've got drop cloths in the ground, right? When you get drops of paint on that drop cloth, do you clean that drop cloth off immediately? No, you wait till you're done. Why don't you put drop cloths pointing right next to each other? So the seams are right next to each other. Right, you're going to get a line right there. So what we're doing here is I don't want to accidentally leave weighting to the back here, or it would be the hip. I want to pass over. So think of this as a tide. Let's say the water rolls up past here. I go up to the arm here, if I can get on there. And what I want to do is I'm going to paint right here like this. You see how I'm kind of going through like that? Now I brought this right back to this creasing point. It does not have to be perfect. So I always pass farther on, like right here, I'm going to pass up like this. So I go past the system, like that. Oops, this one. And now I'm going to go to the arm root here, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to paint past here, and I'm going to come back. So. You always move past the influence that you want. But watch what happens when I move through these. You see how it looks very sharp here? That's what I want. What you're doing, and if you want to retouch this, if you're like, oh, I kind of want this to be a little bit more weighted this here, that's fine. But we're going to be, in week 3, we're going to go over blending. The reason why I do this is because it gives you an idea of if your joint placement is correct. Because you rotate, you can see how your influences are moving around the joints and everything. A lot of times I'll do quick weighting jobs where I'll start blending things in there just to get an idea if my joints are in the right position. When you rig and you lay out your joints, you do have two paths. You can either start weighting the character or put controls. The reason is, what if you're doing only mocap on your character? You don't have controls. You just have your joints, and that's it. And maybe if I'm adding like a ponytail or another thing to control, I'll add that onto the mocap system, onto it. So those are options on there. I forgot if it was James or Joshua. Does that help out a little bit? I think it was James. Does that make a little more sense? I'm going to go through the back too. That being said, I don't block out the clavicles on here. So I'm going to go through, like I can do my neck now here, and I can go through like this. I always go past. So like I said, think of it as a tide coming in. Like that. I go farther than I should because I want to pass that seam line. And I go into my back and I go, okay, let's do this. You see how I went way past this influence. I went way down here. That's that same influence point. So think of it as like a tank top. Okay. So see if I go to the neck, see? I go to the arm. The main thing is if I go to the very first influence, which in our case would be the hip, you see I see no weighting on there. And I'm going to do the mirroring in a second here. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to block out below. This one actually I'm at the ending point here, so I just have to go up to that point here. Again, this is not meant to be perfect. You would, if this is not the finished point of weighting, you would still have to go in and touch up the weighting. Cool. See? Did that help you out, James? Like I said, I can't remember if it was Joshua or James who was asking me on that. Do you guys have any questions on it so far? You guys good? I want to do one more thing on here. I do want you to see if you can press blocked out weighting on here. If you run out of time on that, make sure your weighting on there doesn't look really like ugly on something like a arm shooting up in there. And I talk about that in the podcast. Yeah. What's that? Yes. Yeah. This should not take you more than 30 minutes to an hour at the most. This month, I'm very lenient on it. Get your initial weighting in there. I know you guys are rushed at the end on here. If this is your last thing and there's a little bit of a question onto it, it'll only cost you almost a point. Like I said, this is 5% of your grade. Get your controls, get your joints, and get all these other systems set up first. And then go in and start weighting away on this. The integrated learning, the integrated lab does this. There's an example on this. So when you're done with that, you should be fine on it. Okay? Cool. Awesome. So the last thing I want to do is mirror it on the other side. Very easy. I select my geometry. I make sure my character's back at its default position. I go into my skin. I go into my mirror skin weights, and I go into the options here. And I think it's already set. Yeah, it's already set to go. So I just hit apply, and that mirrors it on the other side. You should definitely save before doing this as a new file. You see? This tool can be very fidgety. Now I will say on here, I did not do the fingers. And also in the podcast when I talk about blocking out, come on. It does go over a couple different methods for blocking out. One is selecting vertices and blocking out based on that. So if you want to select vertices around the finger or the hands, a little easier to grab them, you can do stuff like that. I use both. I use the painting method and I use selected vertices. I just know I didn't have time to cover that now on there. Okay? Cool. Any questions? You guys' break was really good. You guys have a good Thanksgiving? You're like, I'm back here. But look at it this way: 3 weeks of craziness, and then you're off for 2 more weeks. No, it's 3. So you'll have me for another week. So I work on your. It's not that bad. Trust me, Juan. I want you to. I'm kind of getting a head started on this, on the blocking out, because week 3 is a big part of waiting. So I want to get you guys introduced to this. So I kind of throw you into that, and it's fine. I know you guys are online. You only have till tonight to get this done and everything. So if you're falling behind, that's fine. Like I said, if you miss some things on here, it is worth 5%. Get everything else done first, and then push your time into this. Okay? I don't want people stressing out like crazy on this area, but I do want to introduce it. It's an important prospect that we're going to be covering. Cool. Awesome. Okay, that's all I got. So I might, if I'm going to be in lab, I'm going to be in lab a little bit later today and everything. So if you have any questions, jump and ask David real quick. But like I said, I will have this recording up. I'm gonna render it out now, and then I'm gonna go back to my desk and I'm gonna upload it. So it should be up before your integrated lab is done. So if you need to reference back anything, I'll have it up there too. Okay, awesome. Does anybody online have any questions? Everybody's like typing all at the same time. Okay, cool, Emily. Like I should render it out now. I'm going to render now. It'll probably take me about 20 minutes to render it out, and then I'll upload it at my desk. So it should be up before 5 o'clock. Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm going to let you guys go. If you have any questions, like I said, hit me up on Slack. I'll be on Slack pretty much all day, all tonight. So if you have any questions, I'll be there. Outside of between like 5 or 6 o'clock, because I go get food at that time, I'll be on. So you guys can have any questions. I know I'm pushing you guys, so I'm going to be there as much as possible for you guys. Turn that off. Turn that off.